Okay, let's go through it. What is an effective human system for a company?
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of like the question of, what is mental health? Like, what is org system health? And I think a big part of the answer is the system as a system is connected to the exterior in such a way that it is exchanging information with the outside world and then acting intelligently on the information. So that sounds pretty easy. But if you think about sort of all the levels that are getting information, taking action, and those kind of things, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. But our most effective organizational systems are taking on new information and adjusting constantly. And they seem to operate in a way that I would say recognizes the fact that everything changes all the time and sort of adapts not as an interesting one-off, somebody burnt a bunch of social capital and figured out who to meet with and got the plan changed kind of way, but more like we're adjusting this week. We adjust every week kind of way.
Are you good? It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. We haven't really even talked ever, so
I know.
Good to be in touch.
This is going to be interesting to talk to you. So tell me about yourself and what you do, and tell me about the company. Tell me everything.
So I used to be an engineer. I did that for about the first 10 years of my career. I worked for Intel before they had computer chip engineers. They only had hire any engineer that could fog a mirror and bring them in and teach them. So I have a mechie background, but I was an engineer at Intel. And the way it worked back then in that company, they were growing so fast, is if you could do useful things, you were welcome to do more of that. And so I sort of quickly figured out that I was the engineer who was kind of focused on how does the teamwork work and how does the authority structure work and how good are the decisions. And so I sort of found my way there into what I'm doing now, which is looking at kind of the human systems that run organizations and saying, like, what's going on when they're working and what's going on when they're not, and why are so many of them so bad? But a few of them can do amazing things because they're all just people. So what's the difference? And so this career has been about 20 years of that. So it's kind of an engineering take on how human systems work.
It's really interesting. And you've written a book about this.
I have. I've written a few. The most recent one is called Iterate. And it's about that idea of, the most effective human systems are doing this thing where they just keep taking the next bite out of the work. They're iterating through it as opposed to trying to sort of, set a plan in January and follow it all year long.
Okay, let's go through it. What is an effective human system for a company?
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of like the question of, what is mental health? Like, what is org system health? And I think a big part of the answer is the system as a system is connected to the exterior in such a way that it is exchanging information with the outside world and then acting intelligently on the information. So that sounds pretty easy. But if you think about sort of all the levels that are getting information, taking action, and those kind of things, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. But our most effective organizational systems are taking on new information and adjusting constantly. And they seem to operate in a way that I would say recognizes the fact that everything changes all the time and sort of adapts not as an interesting one-off, somebody burnt a bunch of social capital and figured out who to meet with and got the plan changed kind of way, but more like we're adjusting this week. We adjust every week kind of way. And they seem to do really well. And I think that's what that sort of inherent agility, adaptability, and speed and quickness of decision-making is what makes them good. And that's going on in a small percentage of them, but not enough in my mind.
What's an example of a company who does it really well?
Over the years, there have been different ones, and I really hate to name names, but if you look at it, the easy way to do it really is look at any space at a company who is really just walloping their competition. Like in the years I was at Intel, which goes back some years now, I left No4. If you looked at their growth rate, they would get 20% or more growth year over year for 5-10 years, right? They had this way of drawing up from the bottom and continuing to populate the ranks going up, and they just kept going. And that's a big part of what I'm talking about in iterative management is you have to do it that way. If you start bringing in people in the middle, you stall because they have to learn the ropes. Right. And so if you see that sort of up ramp without a fall off, after a couple of years, that's who's doing it. And so they were a great example for a number of years. They're a different company now. It's been a lot of years since, but that's what they were doing.
From the outside looking in, do you think OpenAI is doing this? Practicing what you're preaching here, given all of the, literally every single executive seems to be resigning all the time. How do you just outside looking in and I don't want to pick on them specifically, but why not? how do you, when you look at something like that and you look at like just resignation after resignation, but the fascinating thing is the product's still the best. They're still shipping.
Right.
They're still putting things out.
Right. Well, they have.
How does something like that happen?
And I won't pick on anybody in particular, but I think you can look. I mean, you're talking about the right stuff, right? So if you look at a situation where people are just jumping out all the time, you don't need me talking about sophisticated iterative management to know like something is not right there, right? But if you have a compelling enough product, obviously it sort of makes up for a lot of shortcomings for a while.
Yeah.
And we've seen this in a lot of tech industries and a lot of pockets of tech industry where it's like this new amazing thing comes out, and for a minute it's sort of like it doesn't matter how good you are or aren't because the margins are so good or the demand is so high or the jazz, the sort of the wow factor is so big that it kind of glosses over your troubles. But that doesn't last forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whether it's an OpenAI or another company years ago, I think that, the leaders that I know that are the really solid ones that are looking long term start very early saying, how are we going to scale this thing? How are we going to run it in a way that, as margins tighten or as, things get more complex, we can still kind of keep up? Because you can get away with brute force, endless hours kind of stuff for a period of time. But when you start seeing turnover and things, there's usually a sign there's some problem there.
Silicon Slope Summit is Utah's original and longest running grassroots tech event. It provides entrepreneurs, startups, and leaders the resources and community they need to succeed. With the pandemic behind us, we're excited to bring Silicon Slope Summit back to its original January dates in conjunction with the Sundance Film Festival. We have some unbelievable news. Silicon Slope Summit is free for all Utahns for the first time ever. You heard that right. Silicon Slope Summit is now free. For those looking for an upgraded experience, we are also offering VIP tickets for just $95. Thanks to our partners, sponsors, and government leaders, Silicon Slope Summit is the most accessible tech and startup event in the world. Summit will be hosted in multiple locations throughout the week in both Utah and Salt Lake Valley. There will also be a Startup Alley at Summit this year, where startups and entrepreneurs can meet with investors from around the world to pitch their ideas, receive feedback, and promote what they're building. Of course, we'll be bringing in world-class leaders and speakers, as we have in the past, but we'll also be hosting specific tracks and bringing attendees together for curated networking in a way never done before. You don't want to miss this year's summit. To register, buy VIP tickets, learn about sponsorship, and apply for your startup to be part of Startup Alley, go to siliconslopes.com/summit.
What makes a great leader in your mind?
I think and I'll answer that sort of from my bias,
Sure.
but
from your bias,
and
for sure.
we can talk a little more about what I'm talking about when I say a company iterates. But generally speaking, what's happening in those companies is the leadership understands that they are setting the table for decisions to be made in groups of people because groups of people are intelligent, right? So they don't see themselves as the last arbiter of trouble. They understand they're the decider. They understand what they own, but they also understand that, for example, if they have a staff of a leadership team of 6 or 8 people or 10 people, and one of them comes and says, I think we should take resources from over there and put it over here, it's not their job to adjudicate that in a one-on-one. It's get the whole room together and go, these are the higher level goals. Here's where we're going. In what way will making those trade-offs help or hurt the higher level goals? And so, I always give leaders the advice of like, set the table, don't eat the food, right? Someone brings you a meal to Thanksgiving. You might put it in a nice plate. You might change it around the kitchen. You might set it up, but you don't stand in the kitchen and eat it. You put it out there with everything else. When the leaders get in that habit, what they tell me is, first of all, their meetings run better. Their conversations run better. Decisions go faster because everyone's in the room, but also their lives get better because they're no longer in this sort of dysfunctional parent of quarreling children kind of role where it's like, because if person 1 comes to me and, petitions me for that guy's resources, that guy's coming next week to get it back, right? And all of a sudden my life is not great. So I think the really effective leaders really do understand that there are, teams with charters that are connected to each other, not individuals with goals with a boss that's going to put it all together in this sort of North American cowboy style that just, sounds good on paper and looks good in popular media, but doesn't really work well.
How do you manage that? How do you manage a company so that there's no silos or people who like, this is mine, I own this, and if it gets taken away, given larger company goals or shifts or all the reasons why it would, how do you manage that person?
Well, I don't want to say it's easy because, we humans are hardwired for fairness, right? And we're hardwired for ownership. And so there's a thing about what is success and what is mine. And I think if you try and give people definitions of success that tie to their individual goals, you are encouraging that sort of view of like, what is success and what is mine, right? And what I see in these iterative companies is the people are, as friendly or as thorny as they are, but the kind of culture around them says, for example, Clint, you and me and 5 other people, we're on a staff with a boss, and we together have to get our stuff done to achieve that higher level goal. And neither of us can succeed at the expense of the other. So, if I'm not a super friendly sort, I'm still not a super friendly sort, but instead of being like, give me his stuff so I can win at my goals, it becomes more like, do you need my help? You need to take my help because I don't see you doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make life easy, but it does sort of change the game a little bit so that we have people focusing what success looks like in the right way. Because, we are chasing after our managers and leaders' approval, with that reptile part of our brain that sees that as between us and safety. And so we can have the system behave a little differently and kind of route that energy, I would say.
Is there a specific style of leadership that seems to work better than others? And I'll explain what I mean by that question. So you have Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, who seem like very kind of brutal leaders, right? Where they're very in your face. They're not afraid of confrontation. They want to get it's just whatever. Everybody knows what I mean when I say Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and their leadership style. And then you have the more diplomatic approach. I don't know, Tim Cook doesn't seem like he manages like Steve Jobs or Reed Hastings at Netflix or, even Satya Nadella at Microsoft. That feels like a different way of leading. But by the way, both of those are incredibly successful.
Right.
What's the difference, or is there one?
I think oftentimes what happens, and I've seen this with people I work with and people I work around, is that issue of brutality gets confused with the issue of dealing with conflict. There are healthy conflicts in organizations, right? Do we resource the next generation of product or, perpetuate this one a little longer? Do we fund more marketing over here or do we fund more whatever over there, right? So there are these conflicts in organizations that are inbuilt and people own pieces of those. And it falls to those people to say, hey, we got to sort this out, right? We need, that's the job. And so what seems to happen sometimes is some of the leaders sort of come from somewhere where conflict was glossed over and they go, glossing over it is bad. I'm going to punch you in the face with it instead. And it's like, okay, that's better, but not a lot better. You don't have to punch the person in the face. What you have to do is stand in integrity and say, these things are in conflict and I need to listen to you and understand what it is that I'm breaking by not doing what you want. But I also need to make you hear me and understand what's going to break. And again, there's that question of higher level context, right? This only works if we're looking at the same higher level context. If it's really all about me and my winning at my goals versus you and winning against your goals, it's going to be harder for us to get anywhere. But I think that, do we do it brutally or do we do it, kind of calmly is less important than do we do it? Do we actually resolve those things? And oh, by the way, do those resolutions turn into decisions that turn into real life actions that we are continuing to pay attention to what happens so we can adjust them again, right? That's super important. And so sometimes in the sort of the brutality, school, you see this hyper focus on results. Yeah, focus on results. Good. Again, doesn't have to be brutal. It could be just, we're paying attention. We check every week or whatever to make sure that worked. There's no decision that's ever final, but you also can't not do a decision if we agree as a group. You can do it and you can aggregate data that it's not working and you can bring it back, but you can't just sabotage it. It usually sounds like something like we win by taking turns doing things we disagree with. So you can deliver that message in a whole lot of different ways, but that's the thing from my perspective we need to see in leadership. And the ones that do that somehow do it well. The brutal ones have some turnover problems sometimes for obvious reasons. And I think that's a downside of doing it that way.
Yeah. It's fascinating though, how really, really successful somebody like Elon and Steve were and are, right? Because Steve's gone. That is fascinating to me that approach, and not only successful, but maybe the best of their generation. Right.
Well, they're very smart.
What do you make of that?
They're very smart people, and they had seriously good product ideas, and they, at their point, did a good job of keeping their eye on where they wanted it to go. Right. So, that's the upside. The cost of that is on the back end, no one can tell them anything. And if you look at their arcs, you see where they reach the point where it's like they've delivered this amazing thing and now no one around them is allowed to contradict them. And they start making some odd decisions. Steve Jobs might have died because he wouldn't listen to experts about what health things would help him, right? We could pick apart some of Elon's more recent decisions and go, that was an odd one. Surely someone knew that wouldn't be a great choice. So they're brilliant guys and they succeed, to a point doing that. But I think the cost is, if you turn off the spigot of information coming up, that can work a lot longer if your idea is really amazing. But eventually I think it gets you.
Interesting. Yeah. To a point is really interesting when it talks to those two, because nobody ever gets to their point ever. They're legitimately they got further down the road than anybody, which is really interesting. Anyways.
Well, to our earlier point, there's this issue of what their idea had huge margin, huge wow factor, right? So their idea funded
super intelligent
their shot to get further, but they still kind of run out of road eventually if they don't turn around and listen back up again. And it's hard to do as a human if you've been doing it that way for a while.
Okay. So a lot of this is around like human error and mistakes humans make and, how you're structuring and taking feedback from humans. And then we've got this incredible thing now called AI that every single day something's blowing me away. I don't know if you've seen Notebook LLM from Google. It's insane. You can create it's unbelievable. Anyways, how does AI play into this? And how are you thinking about it as you advise companies?
Everyone's got their take. And I sort of feel like the problem with recording an idea about AI is that it'll be different tomorrow, right? So I wonder, I listen to all the AI experts and I go, how can you be an expert? We all just got off the bus yesterday, here we are. But what I am noticing sort of in my world and how I use it and also people I talk to is it's really, really effective when it's aggregating stuff that needs to be aggregated. Like this is a simple, silly example, but I can go ask AI how to do something in my YouTube account and it has already read all the YouTube help pages and it tells me the answer. Or I can go read all the YouTube help pages myself and be annoyed half an hour later and not figure it out, right? Yeah. So that multiplied way up is great. I also did a thing, I actually wrote an article about this at one point where I asked AI how you would go about doing what it is that I do with the budget I charge and the change that I make. And it went, no, you can't do it. And that's because it's reading most of what's out there and I do a thing nobody does. So it's as you get further from a consistent body of knowledge that all says the same thing, I think you get further into a space where it can give you the wrong answer. That's not a flaw. That's just what it is. What's a little tricky, I think, is that it gives you the wrong answer with great confidence, much like my son used to do when he was 6 years old. It's like, it's always sure. And so I think that makes it hard to you have to kind of remember like what was the query and what is the data under it. And you have to have, I think, awareness of the data set. And if you do that, it's phenomenal. And certainly it can, it's going to get better and better as it gets better at sort of interpreting the data set, I think.
Tell me how your business works. Like, what does a typical day look like for you?
Typical day. They're pretty different. So I'm a small consulting firm, right? So the reason I exist is because I do this thing that nobody else does where I go in and in one quarter, I shift the entire culture of the organization, how it runs, right? And this is a thing that if you talk to people that have been talking to the big four or whatever, they're like, that's not possible. And I go, I know, but I do it. So, so it's a small shop, right? So some days I'm very deep with clients doing that work. Some days I'm trying to figure out how to get the word out a little bit, but not too much because I don't overwhelm myself, right? Some days I'm thinking strategically about how do I scale this thing later on, right? Some days I'm trying to get a day off. So it really is pretty variable. There's travel less since COVID. COVID made my life a lot more virtual, which is nice. But it really is. There are, I worked with someone once to hire some help and she said, you have a lot of swim lanes and you have to jump between them all the time. And I was like, that's pretty much it. So I think that's why I'm still in it because it hasn't bored me yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will.
And you're based in Texas, right?
In Austin, yeah.
Austin. Well, of course, Austin. Look at the burnt orange here, man. You're representing.
I don't wear this anywhere in Texas because it makes a very specific choice about a team. But once I leave town, I can put it on.
That's incredible. So why Texas? Give us your background.
I was there before when I was in Intel. I spent a few years there and I just liked the town. I mean, it's a pretty different town now than it was back then. But for one thing, it's central to the country, so I can get everywhere in 4 hours.
Yeah.
For another thing, the cost of living is pretty reasonable. That's kind of, it's been going up.
Changing
every place
there,
is. Yeah. And the people are friendly and the weather's generally good, a little hot. But I just liked the overall balance. And, now I'm kind of embedded there. I'll be there for a while longer, I think.
Where are you from?
I was born East Coast. I grew up in New Mexico, actually.
Oh, okay. Very cool. So talk us through, like, you walk in first day, or those listening who are like, man, I need what Ed does. give them a first step, or like what steps are we looking at here in order to make this happen?
Yeah. So I always say I only know two things. I know what has to happen and I know how to get it to happen, right? So what has to happen is in the Iterate book. Like if you just buy the Iterate book and do it, you never need to meet me. But the trick is, as you know, you got a company doing things, there's patterns and habits, and everyone reads the book and goes, that'd be great. We're not starting. Why aren't we starting, right? So, when I'm talking about and I have classes and keynotes and things like that, but the thing that I do that nobody does, which I think is the most interesting one to talk about, is I'm going to engage and I'm going to say, look, we're going to come in and, most of what's out there in kind of culture change or change how we work is sort of let's stop, let's go into the mountains for 3 days. Let's craft a plan, and there's value in that, especially for strategic planning and where are we going in 5 years and our vision, no problem there. But the real truth is the work that's not getting done is in your way, right? So when you come in and say we're going to change the culture, everyone stop working. It's like, they're not going to stop working. So you're already, fighting the tide kind of thing. So instead I come in and hey, we're going to get, I do some front end investigation, make sure I understand kind of where the needs are. But generally I'll take the leader and 2 levels of the organization and we'll put them in a room for 2 days. And we'll run the company. Only we'll run the company in the Iterate way. So coming into that meeting, they will all say to me, there's no way I can be gone from work for 2 days. And on the way out, I'll say, raise your hand if you got more work done in these 2 days than you would have otherwise. And all the hands go up, or if it's virtual, all the screens light up, right? Because we're actually processing the backlog. So we kind of start by, let's use this way of working that we think will help you to do some work that you have in front of you. While we're doing that, what we're doing is building kind of muscle memory and shared habit about, hey, this is how we do it. Because if you look at culture, it's just habituated behavior, right? So you can't change the culture of today. The culture of today came from stuff that worked before.
Yeah.
So you're doing a new thing that works. And if we do it all together and we see each other do it and we go, hey, let's just keep doing this, then it kind of perpetuates. And so that's the front end, little investigation, couple days around the company. Then I usually hang out with the leader and his or her team during their weekly meetings. And I kind of whisper in the leader's ear a little bit and go, what about that? What about that? Not a lot. It's probably overstating it to call it coaching. It's like light advice and observation. And, they'll bounce stuff off me too. And then on the back end, we come back again with that same big population and we do a little more practice. And then we do kind of a handoff where it's like, okay, it's been a quarter. You've been running this way. I've been kind of dropping in here and there and helping you out. And now it's either going to be yours or it's not. And by that point, it's like, no, it's working, make it ours. And so we stand up a cross-functional team and we get, we do some things to kind of help perpetuate. And then sometimes I'm done. I mean, I can be in and out in a quarter and the change is there. Other times if it's a huge multinational, they'll say, well, stick around to the next level or something like that. But oftentimes, we get pretty far and usually we get further than they expect.
What was it like writing a book and what has the response been to it?
I've written 3. This is my third one, Iterate, is my favorite. I actually wrote it. I started out writing it as a series of scripts for sort of video education. And then I turned it into a book. So it's like the most conversational thing I ever wrote. So that's cool. Because I was writing it to be spoken as teleprompter, I read everything I wrote out loud 14 times. So it was painfully slow, at least in that part of it. The response has been good. It's an Amazon bestseller. People have repeatedly told me that it's something nobody else is talking about. There's a ton of stuff out there on how to set your strategy and mission, vision, values, and kind of who you want to be as a company, and then like introspectively who you want to be as a leader, which I think is all really good. There's not a lot out there that says, hey, how are we going to do this? Like we've made commitments, we've set a strategy, we've promised our investors or, somebody, our stakeholders, something. How are we going to actually execute on it? And so the feedback I get, especially from like CEO, COO, like chief of staff, people that lose sleep at night over, are we going to get it done? Like have resonated with it really, really well.
That's super interesting. Yeah, that's very cool. And we'll make sure everybody checks that out so that they can read it and, get a sense for everything that you do. So we'll put a link in there. When you look at leadership today, not even just in business, but in public life and all that type of stuff, like how would you grade today's leaders?
My friends sort of have heard me rant about this, but I will just stand there and go, like we're trying to solve whatever the thing is today. I'll go, well, yeah, because our system is take the 2 most extreme positions and fight. And that is not an effective system for human problem solving. There are reasons we have that socially, in kind of public sector. And I don't want to say that it's wrong, but it is not surprising to me that it produces kind of bumpy results. And certainly I will say this, and I tell my clients this, voting in small group decision-making is not productive of good outcomes. It produces irrational results. And the reason is, if I get a group of managers together and I'm the boss and I say, okay, we're going to vote which way we go, those people have a history together and they have a future together, and they will start trading votes. They will start saying, I'll go with you on this one if you go with me on that one. And all of a sudden do that for a year. And I am no longer making decisions based on intelligent data. I'm making decisions based on what Fred wants Ralph to do next time, kind of thing. And so it removes rationality from the system. So in small groups, we talk about, the decider makes a consultative decision. She should learn all the things that are there and then decide as best as possible and then communicate why, right? This is why I'm deciding this. If I learn more things, we'll decide it again. You can't do that in the public sector. So I don't know. I don't have a secret answer.
Why can't you do it?
I mean, structurally you could, but we don't. So I could say we should, but that's not what's built, right? So our public sector is very much built for this sort of opposing things. I mean, our legal system too, right? It's built for opposing things. And you understand why if you look at the history and where it came from, and it was better than what was there before, but it is limiting, again, it has a cost, right? And the cost is when you take two sides of an argument and fight it, you lose a lot of the nuance in the middle. And I think the challenge we're seeing is the challenges we're starting to see, how does AI influence higher education is a great example, right? These are nuanced things. You want to take someone who's pro AI and someone who's anti AI, probably neither one of those is going to be the answer, right? Let AI do everything or don't use it at all, right? So as the issues get more nuanced, the two sides pulling back from each other and fighting becomes less of a productive way to solve.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've societally grappled with that, honestly. I've never heard anyone talk about that. I've never heard a candidate talk about that. I think that's where the fix is. And I don't know how we get there from here, but I would love to, meet some people that want to work on it.
Well, it is a very specific person who decides to go into the public life. It really no matter the side you're on, they kind of have a specific personality, which is we're geared up to just attack. Well, and they're good at, this is what we do. They don't actually solve anything. They're just trying to get more supporters than the other person, which is a really interesting, has nothing to do with anything really.
Right.
When you're supposed to
But that's your way to enter, right? You can't get through the door if you don't have an orientation toward getting as many supporters as you can.
Yeah, at the end, we're all just can you govern? And on the idea of AI, I can't imagine a group less qualified to make any sort of decision. Either side, again, this isn't, but that type of a person, what do they know about it? Right. Whenever you see these tech leaders go and testify in front of Congress, it's always so crazy. The questions that the tech leaders asked. There was one where they asked Zuckerberg how he makes money.
Right.
It's all right. So what are we doing? We're you're 15 years behind on this topic.
It's hard to figure out how to fix that because you're right. The people that are coming in don't have knowledge on that. And now you have a situation where there's probably some argument that if there were equal levels of understanding in the government and the private sector, you might get better results on both sides. It might be easier on the private sector and easier on the people as well. So, I don't know what the fix is for that because you have to enter. It's kind of the old joke about I hate to make this joke because I know a couple people that are in this role and they're very good at it. But the old joke about the HOA president who's you're only going to get a person who wants to be the HOA president in that job. And that's not great, And like I said, I'm acknowledging the people that I know that that's not the case, but it's a little like that, right? I could name some people that would be phenomenal in leadership, and if I said to them, would you ever be president? They would just giggle and move on. It wouldn't even be a serious consideration.
Well, they probably couldn't be.
They probably couldn't be.
Because again, it's you've got to be this great, almost I don't know. It's really, you got to be an influencer, which is a really weird
in a really
thing.
serious way. Well, and I also think I think there's a sense, I have a sense that the life isn't great. It's a little
can you imagine? The life sucks.
Yeah. It's the Taylor Swift effect, right? You can't do anything, everybody watching you, right?
Yeah.
That's not great.
I bet her life's a little bit better than politicians.
Probably. Well,
but a politician's life, can you imagine?
I can't
every day you're waking up and posting something stupid on social media in order to that's so dumb. It doesn't mean.
And you're on the hook. It's sort of the worst case scenario. You're on the hook for anything bad that happens, and you get no credit for whatever goes well. And there was an interview with Obama at some point, and he basically said, nothing gets to me unless nobody can solve it. And I was that was a pretty insightful statement. They're not nothing. Whoever pro or con him, but if it gets to the president's desk. It's unsolvable by definition, right? Because there's too many filters along the way.
Yeah, there's way too many filters.
So there's no way you're going to make people happy once you're there.
That's true. If it gets to the president, I think Kennedy was the first person who said that. If it gets to the president's desk, that's not a problem anymore. That's a decision.
Right.
An
impossible decision.
Yeah, an impossible decision and between two bad options.
Right.
At least two.
Right. There's no good outcome here. And that's why it's there, because no one could pick it.
Yeah. That's really well. What do you think of Utah? Tell us why you're here at Silicon Slopes.
Well, I came to talk to you, and I have a couple clients and friends in the area, and I'm going to check in with them while I'm here. I haven't been in a couple years, but like I said, it reminds me of Albuquerque. Actually, it's sort of the same kind of climate and the mountains and everything. So I do like it. I need to come back in ski season. I used to be quite a skier. I haven't done that in a while, but I need to probably
come
make my
on
way
back,
back.
man.
Yeah.
What do you think in terms of Austin, in terms of like, is it a great startup ecosystem for those who are, because we compare ourselves to Austin a lot, actually, randomly. Like it's another like tech ecosystem that kind of produces similar type of wins and funding as Utah. We have a whole state. It's just a city.
Right.
And still like Austin does really well. What do you think? Like, how is it as an entrepreneurial place to start a company, to lead a company?
I mean, I know a lot of people that love it there and think it's great. It's got a lot of good going for, like I said, reasons I live there.
It's so different now.
It has changed quite a bit. It's one of the interesting things about Austin, and this is probably, a global truth about humans, but sort of like I've lived there long enough now to see this feature of like people move there, and then within a year they turn around and go, God, the people moving here are ruining this place. And it's like, what? But I mean, to be fair, it's had amazing amounts of influx. I have friends in real estate who, there were periods of time, like for years, where it was like hundreds of people per day moving in. So that changes a place, and it changes a place in the obvious ways like traffic, but it changes a place kind of more fundamental ways too.
Yeah, culturally,
so the culture changes. Yeah. And that sort of the overall ethos of how you are, but so I don't know, like, I don't know anybody recently who has sort of sat down and went, stay in California, go to, Salt Lake area, Provo area, or go to Austin. Like, I don't know anyone who's in that boat right now, but it does seem to have some draw. And here too, I've heard things about here too, where it's like, there's a, and then Boise
Austin, Boise, Miami, Dallas, Asheville, which just went through a terrible,
Asheville's in trouble right now.
Tragedy, but that they were growing exponentially. It was crazy. It was like kind of like the new Austin. So that'll be fascinating to see what all that does.
Yeah.
How do people get a hold of you or get in touch, or if they want to work with you, what should they do?
Best place to start is iteratenow.com. That's the website. There's also groupharmonics.com is my company, but either it all kind of leads back to me. And there's some, if you go, the good thing about iteratenow.com is there's some videos on there. You don't have to read the book to know what I'm talking about. There's a video that just talks about someone named Alice, and it's like 6 minutes. This is what life looks like in iterative management company. And we can chat about that if you want, but basically it's like, here's how it looks different than most of what you've seen in management. No terminology, no model, just like in a given day in the life, here's what it looks like. And I've found that to be really, really helpful in articulating to people what it is I'm talking about, because that is the challenge, I think, in my work, is to say, we have 10 or 20% of companies in any given space that are running very differently. It's like, what do you mean running differently? And so, there's a few key things. We've talked about some of them, this idea that we're not sitting around in January making a strategy, and then for the rest of the year, we're going to have meetings in which people more or less give performances to show how well it's going against the strategy. And instead we have meetings, people go, we're trying to go here. Right now we're going there, and there's a difference. And so what do we do right now to fix that difference? And so it's future looking. And so the ramifications of that across the system are pretty huge. So I think that Iterate Now site is a good place to kind of get a feel for what the change is. And then there's a little button at the top of that one called Accelerator. If you hit that, it kind of shows some of the results when we've gone in and done the 1 quarter change, because that's another one that's sort of hard to get your brain around hearing me talk about it. Yeah. But if you kind of look, there's some videos, people that have done it. There's one CEO who said, 5 years later, you could not pry this out of our company if you wanted to, and you wouldn't want to. Like, there's some really cool stuff there. So that's a good way to kind of enter the fray, if you will.
What does life look like under iterative management?
Well, the big difference is what we're doing in the groups is making decisions. And so, like, one of the things that I often tell my clients is, if you're having just a regular old staff meeting and you're 22 minutes in, 25 minutes in, and you haven't made a decision, like a real, like, we're going to do this differently, everyone's going to do this, right? And are on your second one, something's not right. Now, that's not going on in a lot of companies. A lot of staff meetings take the form of, there's you and me and our 5 peers, and our boss is sitting over there, and we each take turns going around the room. And, for 7 minutes, I talk about how well my area is going. And so maybe we make a decision somewhere in there, but probably not, and that's a lot of how companies run. And, it's funny, I think, and especially I think in your crowd, this is really pertinent. It seems to me that it's somewhere between 25 and 50 people we're at tips, right? If we get 5 of us together, we're going to run the way I'm talking about. What are you doing next? What do you need? What do I need? Right? It's going to happen. As soon as you get to 25 to 50 people, depending on how complex the work is, now we've got to, like, we're in this room and I'm someone's boss's boss when I'm in this room. And now that person's passing up a it's okay boss kind of thing. And so that's where it sort of tips into this sort of very statusy thing where all of a sudden it becomes the job of the boss to be like, I have to listen. Because that's the thing. So our boss, while we're doing our 7-minute updates, it's that person's job to listen to each one and try and figure out, like, are they telling the truth? Are they spinning it a little bit? Like, hey, you said that and you said that. How's that going to go? Right. So this one person has to piece this together. In iterative management, that person is saying, this is the higher level goal of this team. You guys figure this out. And so we're piecing it together, right? So it's like you've got all 8 brains around the table working on it instead of just one.
Yeah, it doesn't create silos.
It doesn't. It actually breaks them down kind of organically. And it's important because it's, 25 to 50 people, I work that size all the way up to multinationals, but it's pretty unfair that at 50 people, you start acting like a giant company because you're not. You still need to be small and agile. And so it's pretty bad that, if you get to 50 people and you're starting to get bureaucratic, you don't want that, right? So this has been really helpful, I think, to companies that size to say, no, we're going to give you something it's light, it's scalable, it's not going to weigh you down with templates, right? It's not going to be a slide deck. It's just going to be like a way of being in the company that lets you keep advancing the thing forward, lets you shift when you want to shift so that you're not, it shouldn't be weird to change direction. It should happen all the time. And that's a big change.
This message is coming at a very good time. Did you see Paul Graham's essay on founder mode that, went viral and everything that Brian Chesky at Airbnb is talking about around that? It seems like he's gone from what you just described, like the bureaucracy, to this.
Well, there's a couple of different, I think, false trade-offs out there. We talked about one, which is this sort of like, do I have to be, cruel, and combative or not, right? Another one is, hands off or hands on, right? It's like, so there's these pushes of like founder mode is like way leaning on micromanagement. It's like, no, I mean, yes, because if the other thing is absentee management, that doesn't work either. But, appropriate levels of engagement and appropriate levels of what I call level of abstraction, meaning, the goals we carry in our leadership meeting are less granular than the goals they carry at the next level down or 2 levels down. If we get that level of abstraction right, and it's not that hard to do, then we can be at the level we're at most of the time. We can deep dive if we need to, but we don't have to micromanage. Yeah. But we're also not doing a sort of a trust fall hands-off thing where it's like, they'll do their stuff and just bring me your results and I'll knit it together. You know, that's another one. The other one is, and this is a big one while we're talking about false trade-offs, is there's this thing about as you get bigger, you get slower. And part of what I hear from these guys that are reaching that 50, 100 person mark is that the advice they're getting is, you're going to have to slow down a little. And I always say the same thing. I go, look, if I take your computer and I change the microchip and I get back to you, so I put a bigger microchip in it, it's a larger, more complex system that's running it now. So your computer will be slower, get used to it. You would fire me as your IT guy, right? That's terrible, right? So that's you're adding computing power to this thing. If you're not adding speed and versatility, then you're doing it wrong. But most of what's out there will say, well, you got a lot of people now. You have to slow down. You have to have templates. You have more slides, right? No, you can go faster. You should go faster. The more you have, the bigger your network, the faster you are if you do it right.
How much better would companies be if there were no titles?
That's an interesting question. I do know that I think it's fair to say that probably the majority of companies that I've been around that have run in an iterative way, the title becomes secondary to who cares about what output. I don't know. I hate absolute things like that because you have to have a title, go out in the world and talk to people or else they'll just get confused. So that's one reason. You have to have some level of understanding of who's doing what thing. Right. So, I don't know that the titles need to go away. I do know that the information transfer needs to happen. And if the titles are conducive to that, it's probably helpful. I think if the titles put you in a situation where, that person, Clint is the title VP guy in the corner office, I can't talk to him. That's not serving you well, right? And oftentimes I'm working with Clint and I'm going, Clint's like, no one tells me anything, why not? So nobody really wants that, but the fear happens. And I think to that extent, I think that's what drives people to say flatter is better. Yeah. It's less fear, more information transfer.
Yeah. Who did that? The guy who sold his shoe company to Amazon, Tony Hsieh. He tried that type of management, and I'm
not familiar with that story.
Just super flat.
Super flat, yeah.
Zappos? Is Zappos?
Oh, is it Zappos? Yeah. He did flat, no titles, kind of for a while there was a push. It wasn't him. There was a push towards self-managed teams. And it's like, what do you mean by self-managed teams? If you mean the team works together on one charter, yes. If you mean nobody ever makes a decision because it's self-managed or they have no accountability
there is no charter.
There is no charter. They have no accountability for that charter. Then like, I don't know how that's going to work. And then it's sort of, when I see those things, usually they kind of get pulled over into the HR space. Like, it's like, now it's like the open office thing. Like open office is better. No, closed out. It's like, it just becomes we need content for social media. Here's something we can talk about, but it's kind of I think a distraction more than anything else.
Yeah, the open office versus closed office thing. That was way funny. Now it's work from home versus in office. That's the new debate.
Right.
Where do you land on that? Does it matter?
It matters a lot less if you're running well. It matters for, obviously, some people have to go where the stuff is to do the work. But if you're a person that's doing work that's kind of conceptual, from what I've seen, it matters a whole lot less in a kind of a micro sense where you are that day. There certainly is something lost to relationships if you never meet in person. And the big companies, I was working for Intel in 98 and we had a global workforce and we tried to get together if we could once a quarter, once a year, once a half, because we recognized that, relationships are built in person. So you have to correct for that a little bit. But it's interesting because I do think and I saw this in the pandemic too, the move to virtual drives the need for discipline around the kind of stuff I'm talking about, right? So if you're, for example, having a meeting to make decisions, you can correct for a lot of bad meetings if after the meeting in the hallway on the way to the next thing, everyone talks and makes a few decisions, right? Once you take away the hallway because the Zoom ended, like you've lost that. So what I saw is that virtual work drives the need for more, I almost say discipline, but more structure and more sort of consistency in the area of, doing these things well. And I think if you have that, it kind of doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, we end every interview with this question, and that is, we believe the chances one gives is just as important as the chances one takes. When you hear that, who gave you a chance to get you to where you are today?
The first person I think of is my mentor, Bill Daniels. He is retired now. I still visit him and his wife as often as I can. They're honorary grandparents to my son. I met him when I was at Intel and he was teaching some of the early versions of this stuff there. And I never had met him before and I had never seen it before. And I said to him, I want to do this someday, I think. And he had lunch with me and told me things that I was recalling 23 years later and going, that was good advice. And then we just slowly formed a friendship over the years. And then when I moved out on my own, he kind of was an advisor to me for a while. And then at some point we were closer together. And one day he and his wife sat me down at lunch and said, now we're going to sell you this company. And I went, I'm sorry, what? It's time for you to continue it. And so what Iterate is, it's the combination of the work I was doing in culture and the combination of work he was doing in sociology of leadership and the kind of the psychology of leadership. And I would not have this career without him. So he's definitely one of the ones that gave me a big boost.
That's incredible. Ed, thank you so much for coming up here to the great state of Utah and sharing your wisdom. It means a lot.
Clint, thank you. Appreciate being here.
Thanks, man.